Whoa, we've got a full house today. Welcome everyone. My name is Tyrone Squires. I'm Managing Director of TransparentRx. And the title of the webinar I just shared with you on the previous screen. If you don't mind, I'm going to get right down to business today. As time passes, I get a little bit more excited about what's happening in the PBM industry. In fact, I'm going to take it so far to say that I don't know what the fuss is about. Where the price and cost of prescription drugs is concerned, there are a number of methods and strategies to get the cost to a reasonable level. Now, listen, there's about 0.25% of the population where the price of prescription drugs is just unreasonable. At some point, there will be programs that address the cost for those patients. But for 99.75% of the American population, and trust me when I tell you this, the prices for prescription drugs don't have to be as high as they are today. I'm going to touch on that when we get to the end of the webinar. So you want to make sure that you stick around. A little bit about myself. I want you to be able to trust the source of the information you're going to receive today. It's going to be a lot of it in a very small window. I started out on the manufacturing side, eventually working my way into the corporate offices where I led a team that was charged with negotiating, paying rebates to PBMs with Eli Lilly. I left Eli Lilly, started my own mail order pharmacy. Sold that pharmacy right around the time when things took a turn for the worse, or were started to take a turn for the worse in terms of the reimbursements coming back to pharmacies from pharmacy benefit managers who essentially controlled our destiny. It felt like we worked for the PBMs. And so after selling that company, I started what today is the first and maybe the only fiduciary model PBM. It is in my best interest to share with you as much as I know, as much as I can in 30 to 35 minutes. That's what the fiduciary model is predicated on. That's not what the webinar is about today. We'll touch on that just a little bit, but it's in my best interest not to withhold anything from you. Those of you who know me know that's how I move. If you have any questions from me or for me, there's a couple ways to get those to me. You can raise your hand, and there's a couple competitors out there, representatives from other PBMs. Please, if you disagree with anything that I'm sharing, let's have a discussion. I'll unmute you. Let's have a conversation, and let's let everyone else in on it. The second way to get a question to me is just to send it via chat down here. When we have a break in the action, I'll try to get to those questions as best I can, but more times than not, I'm going to get to those questions at the end of the webinar. 3 things I want to have happen today. I want you to know more about how PBMs make money. I want you to feel something other than indifference, and then I want you to take some action, no matter what your role is. Whether you want to be a part of the solution, whether you have clients who purchase PBM services, or whether you are an employer group who relies on PBM services, I want you to address the pricing problems. More specifically, the overpayments going to PBMs. So whenever we ask a question to a potential client, what's your most pressing problem around the pharmacy benefit? It's going to usually come back one of two things, either price or a lack of transparency. That's intentional, folks. That is intentional. Most PBM business models have been built or structured to make it difficult to ascertain what they are taking home. They are built around information asymmetry, which means this: when one party has access to information that another party doesn't have access to, the party with the information is going to withhold it from the other party sitting across the table who they're negotiating with. That's what PBMs do. It is as much, if not more, about information than it is the prices that you see on a weekly basis or a monthly basis for prescription drugs, maybe on a daily basis for prescription drugs. It is that information that allows you to tackle the pricing problem. This is an example of information symmetry or information success. Remember, one of the problems is information asymmetry. Most, it doesn't matter whether it's a public plan sponsor or commercial. Most of them do not receive, when a drug is dispensed and it's a brand drug, a PBM receives a rebate either directly from the pharmaceutical manufacturer, if it's eligible for a rebate, either directly from the pharmaceutical manufacturer or by way of a rebate aggregator. As a fiduciary model PBM and a radically transparent PBM, when we pay rebates back to our clients, we send along a receipt with the payments that they receive from us. Would you believe that most plan sponsors, commercial and public, do you understand that they just receive a bucket of dollars without any explanation for those dollars? And they accept that. What they should be receiving is claim level. What they or you should be receiving is claim level detail for those payments, for every claim that was eligible and then received a rebate payment from the drug manufacturer. Could you imagine what you could do with that information in holding the PBM accountable? They don't want you to have it. Here's why. And stay with me here. This only gets better, folks. The status quo says this: most purchasers, or maybe many, I need to be careful with my choice of words. Many purchasers of PBM services enter into an agreement with a PBM that calls for an artificially too low administrative fee. The significance of that is that the administrative fee, whether it's a per claim or a PEPM or a PMPM, is really the only source of revenue that a PBM takes into its bank account that can be measured. Everything else, remember, information asymmetry. PBMs making it difficult to ascertain what they're being paid for the services they were hired to perform. And so when a plan sponsor enters into an agreement with a PBM that calls for an artificially too low administrative fee, and by artificially too low, I'm saying that it is as low as no charge whatsoever. And the administrative fee, typically there's services bundled into that, right? It might include the claims processing function, account management services, electronic prescriptions, 24-hour call center services. You might even have some clinical services bundled into that. That's typically what is involved in the administrative fee. And so when it's artificially too low, the PBM can then augment that artificially too low fee in the back end. That's where things start to get cloudy. That's where the information asymmetry starts to take place when your client or you enter into an agreement that calls for an artificially too low PBM administrative fee. This also includes, lest I forget, those deals where the PBM says, hey, why don't you forego your rebates? Instead, apply that money up front. In exchange, instead of waiting 9 months for your rebate dollars to start coming in, why don't you take an admin fee credit on your medical? It's the same game, different name. Same game, different name. This slide is a second source that only serves to support the previous slide. And so remember, I started out in 2002 on the manufacturer side. I remember this, where the small molecule brand drugs, the rebates, the PBMs were feasting off of them. PBM clients got smart. PBMs lost the revenue, started shrinking, and then they shifted it here. Remember mandatory mail order? Remember that? PBM clients got wise, closed that leaky faucet off. PBMs did what? Shifted it here. Specialty drug rebates. Now PBM clients are getting smarter and wiser about eliminating those rebates. And it doesn't take a big group to start to affect PBM revenues, and where analysts start to get a little nervous and shareholders start to get a little nervous. And so now, if we move this out here now to 2020, right, this is shrinking, but out here, you've got MBDCs, medical benefit drug claims. All the consolidation taking place, despite what you read, there are some advantages to members and plan sponsors for having the carrier and the PBM and the TPA all under one roof. It makes it easier for the PBMs and the carriers to exchange information. It doesn't make it easier for you to get access to it, and it certainly doesn't mean that your costs are going to go down. And by the way, I try to provide sources for so when I provide these sources, I don't want you to just take my word for it. There are people smarter than me who happen to believe the same thing that I believe. And so I'm not here to bash PBMs. There's a lot of folks out there who are willing to do that, who will even go as so far as to say that, what do we need PBMs for? Trust me, you need PBMs. But what you don't need is greedy PBMs overcharging for their services. And that's what we're here today, to start the process of fixing that. And so I'm going to touch on these kind of 3 hidden cash flow streams as we walk through this. But it's important that you understand the PBM business model. And so I'm going to be addressing pretty much everything on the right side. If you want the stuff on the left side, we've got a class for that, and I might spend a little bit of time talking about that. But let me start with the contractual relationship. Pharmacy benefit managers contract with pharmacies in order to have sites from which product can be dispensed or provided to our members. Obviously, once we establish those networks, or we establish specialty pharmacies or mail order pharmacies, which again, it's another issue for another day, we have to have clients who provide those services too. Those clients are third-party payers, health plans, large employer groups, mid-sized municipalities, city, state governments, coalitions, unions. The list is fairly exhaustive. As it pertains to the financial flow, we reimburse pharmacies for the prescriptions that they dispense. Pharmacies agree to the terms that we set forth in that relationship. And sometimes they enter into kind of purchasing organizations such as a PSAO, where they consolidate their buying power. PSAO, Pharmacy Services Administrative Organization, where they consolidate their buying power and come to the PBM and say, hey, we want a deal because now we're 500 pharmacies and not just one. We want a better deal. Remember, unless the PBM owns a pharmacy, we never take control of the product. Unless the PBM owns the pharmacy, and even when there's a PBM and a retail chain owned by the same parent company, they should be operating independent of one another. Right? So unless a PBM owns a pharmacy, mail order, specialty, we never take inventory of the product. So we reimburse pharmacies for the prescriptions that they dispense, and then we bill our clients for those dispensed prescriptions. The problem here is threefold. First, the inflow of cash in the form of rebates is too low. I just shared 2 slides with you that essentially validated the fact that PBMs, despite what they tell you, we're only going to get 5%. You're going to get 95%. The opposite is actually true of that. We'll give you some more information on that here in a bit. So the first problem is the intent of rebates is not to provide the HR department with additional dollars to hire new employees or to invest in new equipment. The intent of rebates is to lower the cost of the drugs. It is to get to the lowest net cost. The second problem here is that the reimbursement back to the PBMs is too high. I know what you're thinking. Not us, not me. Well, we'll see here in a second. We'll see here in a second. The third problem, which is my main goal in hosting these webinars, is that if you take a look at this diagram, look who sits at the very top of this diagram. It is the purchasers of PBM services. The problem with this is the money is flowing down. You and your clients support the entire system financially, but know the least about how it works. When I say that, that gives me chills. When I say that, that gives me, it is scary. No wonder everyone thinks that the price of prescription drugs is too high. Because you sit atop the system and know the least about how it works, and the vendors, the entities within the system, are fleecing far too many purchasers of PBM services. We aim to help you fix that problem. So the drug pricing standard for that forms a basis for discounted prices is known as AWP. On the other side of the aisle, we refer to AWP as ain't what's paid. It's artificially inflated. No one pays it. No one pays AWP, but costs are often based upon this inflated price. The MAC price, and so we're talking about generic drugs right now, because if a spread is going to happen from a volume perspective, it's going to happen in generic drugs. It does happen in brand drugs, both small molecule and your more complicated biologic specialty drugs. It does happen there as well. But just in terms of the number of claims, you're going to see it way more in generic drugs. The second type of price is the MAC. It's more closely related to the actual acquisition cost, but the MAC itself is higher than the actual acquisition cost of the drugs. As a purchaser of PBM services, and I've got claims running through the system, being adjudicated every minute of the day, I want to know what the drugs cost. How are you cutting checks for things you don't even know what they cost? I'm not talking about what you are billed. That's different. So let's take a look here at those two price benchmarks. I want to show you how spreads manifest in real life. And maybe some of you know or have a decent idea, but let's take a look here real quick. And so this form here, what I'm sharing with you is something that I post on our blog, blog.TransparentRx, every week. And we provide some drugs and we share with you what they actually cost, what the pharmacy paid, and what the AWP is. Okay, and so let's take a look here at levothyroxine, right? Levothyroxine is just, it's a thorn in my side, right? It's on our formulary. Synthroid isn't. Everyone wants the Synthroid, and it's just a thorn in my side. That's a different topic, but it treats hypothyroidism, right? Right. That's what it treats. And so so you look here at levothyroxine. The AWP is, let's call it, it's 561. Let's call it 560. All right, let's call it 560. If, as a plan sponsor, you were to negotiate with the PBM an effective discount off of AWP of 85%, right? An effective discount just means no matter the price benchmark being used, effectively, when I back in my cost into AWP, I'm getting an 85% discount, right? So whether it's AWP, MAC, UNC, whatever it is, even the copay. Effectively, I'm getting an 85% discount off of AWP. All right, so $560, let's say the discount is 85%. That means that I'm getting a 400, let's just call it 475 discount. That means the cost of the drug to the plan is $85. David, good question, or good point. I'll address that here in a second. All right, $85. Okay. Look at what the drug cost. $4. So theoretically, the PBM could reimburse the pharmacy. Let's call it 100% markup. Let's call the dispensing fees a wash. Let's call it 100% markup, right? Let's call it 100% markup. The PBM could theoretically reimburse the pharmacy a total of $8 to pay for the cost of the drug, plus an additional $4 the pharmacy keeps to cover overhead and hopefully make a little bit of profit, right? So let's just call it $10 to make it easy. That's a $75 spread, folks. That's a $75 spread. That's how spreads work. Right? Now, the MAC price. Now, hopefully, this drug is on the MAC list. We're going to talk about MAC lists here in a second. But hopefully, this drug is on the MAC list. Remember, MAC lists are dynamic. They are not static. And they're controlled by us, PBMs, right? And so let's say that this drug is on the MAC list. Let's say the MAC price is $15. The PBM's out of pocket of $10 doesn't change. Now the spread is $5. David says that the AWP is wrong. I think he wrote it should be $480. Couple things about that. First, the information on this particular slide is old. The second thing is, when did I post this? This is probably at least a year or two old. The second thing is, the AWP also depends on who the manufacturer is. The AWP for a generic drug, if there's 10 manufacturers, are not going to all be the same. So it depends on who the manufacturer is. Now, you may think, I said earlier, this is not happening to me. There's no way. This is not happening to my company. There's no chance. The state of Ohio 2 years ago decided to pivot on how they were evaluating their PBM's performance and how they were going to evaluate future offers from PBMs based upon an RFP from the state of Ohio. For the first time, the state of Ohio decided they wanted to use as a metric what the PBM was making off of the service it was hired to perform. Those two PBMs at the top of this slide, CVS Health and Optum, took home in 1 year $250 million just in spreads. Didn't even look at rebates yet. Hadn't even looked at rebates yet. $250 million. And again, you know me, don't take my word for it. The information is public, okay? Go out and read it for yourself. And so if Greg was here today and he was on the webinar, and he would tell you, to a woman and to a man, that this isn't information we've never had before. It was information they never chose to have, that they never chose to evaluate before. Again, remember at the very beginning what I told you about the problem, the pressing problem being price. But the reason that is the pressing problem is because one of them primarily is information asymmetry, or in other words, information failure. When the state of Ohio gathered more information, they weren't impatient, they were patient. They learned what they were paying the PBMs just in terms of spreads. They didn't say, oh, this is too much. They evaluated it and later decided that this is too much. And when they decided that, they terminated the contracts almost overnight. You know how slow state services can be in dealing with the state, right? But when they learned this information, almost overnight, those contracts were terminated and they went back to the negotiating table. Part of the reason are the nuances in PBM contracts. I'm going to touch on two: MAC list and rebates. Contract language gives the impression that there's only one MAC list. Real quick anecdote here. A student of mine, after the class was over, came back to me. They went to their insurer, their PBM that happened to also be under the same umbrella of a carrier, and asked them, how many MAC lists do you have? And the response was 44. But we're working to get that down. What? And that they were proud of the fact that they were working to get that down. Why not just have one? Right? Why not have just one? The problem with MAC lists is that the employer's MAC list would be less comprehensive. The pharmacy's MAC list is always going to be the most aggressive. You want to try to match that aggressiveness the PBM has placed on the pharmacy with the PBM yourself. And so the employer's MAC list will have fewer generics. I just shared with you the implications of AWP price benchmarking and MAC benchmarking. Employers' prices are higher than the MAC prices paid to the pharmacy. That generates spreads. The pharmacy is paid with the lowest price MAC list. Again, the contract language. I mean, folks, on page 1 of the PBM contracts, if someone were to say, hey, page 1 of the PBM contracts with the definitions is the most important piece of the PBM contract, I wouldn't argue with them. It sets the foundation for the financials throughout the term of the contract. I'm going to show you some examples here. Public information. Okay? Public information. Kaleo, drug manufacturer, was sued by Express Scripts, the nerve of Express Scripts, to sue this relatively smaller drug maker because it refused to pay rebates to Express Scripts, and the nerve of them to not care that this information is going to go public. They don't believe that you're going to do anything about it. The formulary rebate is dwarfed by the administrative fees. The administrative fees here are not the same administrative fees that I touched on earlier that encompass claims processing, right? Account management services, call center services. This is not the same. It has been relabeled, driven by PBMs. Honestly, if you talk to most manufacturers, they prefer not to pay rebates and just have, lower costs at the point of sale. Now, I don't know how well that would work in terms of keeping prices. You got to have someone who can match dollar for dollar with them to bargain the prices down. The problem isn't rebates. The problem is they're not getting back to the plan sponsors in totality. A second example, and so, okay, listen, in the PBM industry, in pharmacy, stuff gets out late. You don't have research done in 2016 and it's released in 2016. Okay, so just hang in there with me. But the point is, again, this is public information. The point is that there are other rebates other than formulary rebates, and when a PBM puts its standard contract in front of you or in front of your client, it is hoping that you will accept just formulary rebates or a high percent of formulary rebates, but you leave all the other different names that apply to these dollars for them to decide on how they want to pay them or whether they want to pay them at all. Outcomes rebates, value-based contracts. These have been happening since at least 2009. I've not yet seen one contract, not one, where outcomes or value-based rebates where the employer group has not allowed the PBM to dictate whether or not the PBM is going to keep those dollars and what percent they're going to keep. It's been going on for a decade. And it'll be in the contract. It'll be in the fine print. Clinical services, performance, something around performance, you aren't entitled to, we get to keep it. What I am saying to you, in exchange for radical transparency, you pay a higher flat administrative fee, right? You pay a higher flat administrative fee, because ultimately what I want you to take away today is this. Like the state of Ohio, you must have a full understanding of what the PBM is taking home, because the importance of that is that their fee is hidden in your cost. In your own businesses, you've got things down to the penny. But when it comes to PBM services, you don't even know what you pay them. That is different than the bill you receive at the end of the year for what you paid for pharmacy benefits. Hidden in that number is the PBM's take home. The formula looks simple enough. Earnings after cash disbursements is a fancy way of saying the PBM's management fee. The formula looks simple enough, but as I alluded to in the very beginning, PBMs intentionally make it difficult to ascertain what their fees are, what their management fees are. If you have an arrangement with the PBM that provides at a minimum radical transparency. Radical transparency would dictate you are able to determine and get information for all of these different components here. Everything in green at some point lands in the PBM's bank account. Red would be a reimbursement to a pharmacy for a dispensed prescription to a PBM's plan participant. A share of rebate dollars back to the third-party payer. That is a cash disbursement. Whatever is left over goes into the PBM's bank account. It is what you pay them for the service. Here I go again. More proof. In your materials, in your control panel, there should be a material section. I think you'll get it, the document via email follow-up tomorrow, I think. But in that case study, the broker of this particular client is named. If he wants to tell you who the client is, I'll let him do that. But I have one quick question based upon what you see here. Right? And so, well, some people will say, why don't you show us something for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Why don't you do that? Well, because I want you to see how fast costs can go down. If you sign up with TransparentRx, you're not as concerned about cost 2 years from now as you are in Q1. You want to see results right away, and so do I. I'm not going to do a poll, but I want to put a question out to everyone out there. I just talked about earnings after cash disbursements, the PBM's management fee. When you look at Prime Therapeutics costs before we took over this client, and you look at our cost, what was Prime's management fee? Just send it to me via chat. What was Prime Therapeutics management fee? No takers? Prime Therapeutics management fee is the difference between $57.88 and $26.58. You know how you know? Prime Therapeutics at a minimum gets the same deal we do with pharmacies, and they get the same deals we do with drug makers for rebates. In fact, they get better deals, but I'm not going to go there. At a minimum, Prime Therapeutics was charging this client $31 per member per month to be their PBM. Worse yet, that $31 PMPM is higher than what they freaking pay with us all in. That's why I don't understand what the big deal is about prescription drug costs. It ain't the prescription drug cost that's the problem. The problem is the PBM's management fee and what you are paying them for the service. It makes me angry. It makes me angry. We're not talking about oil or advertising. We're talking about, in some cases, the difference between life and death. If members don't get these drugs in their hands. Stay with me here. I'm making good time. Stay with me here. The most important slides are coming up. In 2018, the CEO who's just announced his retirement from CVS Health, said this in 2018. We underwrite, and see, it could be one word that can make all the difference. Greg Moody with the state of Ohio, he said, this is information we hadn't had before. Information. The CEO of CVS Health said, we underwrite contracts. The key word, contracts, to overall level of profitability and many levers available to pull depending on the preferences of the client. Listen, again, this is public information. This isn't my slide. It's out on Google for you to review. Although they may have taken it down after I put it on my blog. Okay? But I was able to go back to the Wayback Machine, find it, and put it back on my blog. Let me tell you what this means in layman's terms. We're going to make as much money as we possibly can. And ultimately, how much money we make as much money as we possibly can. Underwrite contracts to overall level of profitability. That's where that piece comes in. We're going to make as much money as we possibly can. The amount of money we make is ultimately going to depend on how sophisticated or unsophisticated our clients might be. The more sophisticated the client, there are less levers available to pull. A unsophisticated client, they leave a bunch of levers to pull. That is essentially what he is saying there. What's this got to do? What's this got to do with PBM services? Here's what I can tell you. When I walk into a car dealer and I need repairs on my car, I don't know what the heck they're talking about. I don't have a clue what I need or don't need from that auto repairman. And unless that auto repairman is 100% looking out for me, I'm going to get fleeced. I know it. And I walk in steely-eyed, like you're not going to get me today. And they recommend services, and because I don't want to be fleeced, I refuse services that I probably need. Because you're not going to get me today. I have no knowledge on what you're going to be doing, but I'm just going to say no to a few things to make you believe that I know what I'm talking about. That's what's happening with PBM services. The same exact scenario plays out every 2 to 3 years come renewal time. You bang your fist on the desk, prices are too high, you're not being transparent, I need more from you. And you may refuse services that you actually need and would benefit from, but you refuse them because you don't want the PBM to fleece you. But unless that PBM is 100% on the up and up and looking out for you, or two, you're a sophisticated purchaser of PBM services. You are, in this scenario, an ex-mechanic walking into a car repair shop and they say you need this and you say, no, I don't, and here's why. Or they say you don't need this and you say, yes, I do, and here's why. And then they reply, yeah, you got me. You got me. It is about information and being able to interpret that information. This program is the first of its kind in the world. Go out on the web, read more about it. But the new path says this, folks. The new path says this. Either the PBM offers to put you first as their client, they're 100% on the up and up, or you demand it. And in order to demand that, you must be sophisticated. If you are not, that PBM in all likelihood is going to take advantage of that. The new path is a reasonable admin fee, and then all the hidden cash flows, they go away. And it's not talk, it's embedded, it is explicit in the contract language. And without that explicitity in the contract language, it means jack. Listen, that's my time today. I hope you've learned 2 or 3 things that you can take away and start digging into as you move, either want a job in the PBM industry, somehow you buy PBM services, you advise on PBM services. I hope you're able to take away 2 or 3 things today that would help you eliminate overpayments to PBMs, because I don't know what all the fuss is about. Have a great day. I'll stick around for a few seconds just in case any questions come through.